Hello, my name is Rich Howard, owner of Architectural Builder Supply. In this video is to bring you a closer look at the Bommer number BB5000-454-652. This is a ball bearing hinge, and let's go over it now. It's a BB5000 454-652 finish. Best way to proceed, really, I think, is to just simply dissect the part number so that we can get a better idea in terms of what this hinge is. First of all, it's a ball bearing hinge. On this hinge, it'll have two bearing packets, one here and one here. The 5 means that it is 5 knuckle. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's a 5 knuckle hinge, the most common hinge, in fact. The 0 in the part number means it's a full mortise hinge. When you look at the swag on the hinge leaf here and here, you can see that the leaves are meant to be mortised to the edge of the door and frame when they are brought parallel to each other. The next 0 in the part number, I don't recall what that means. Let's take a look. Okay, so that next 0 means that it is a standard hinge. It's not a derivative of a full mortise hinge like you would see in either a raised barrel or a wide throw hinge, or an anchor hinge, that sort of thing. Then the final 0 in the part number, that means means two things. It means it's made of steel, and it also means that it is a standard weight hinge. And standard weight means that on a 4.5 inch tall hinge, the leaf is 134 thousandths. And our caliper tells us it's 130, almost 135 thousandths. The other leaf is precisely 134 thousandths. Yeah, 134 thousandths. That is a 10 thousandths. Half of a, it's perfect, is the bottom line. Now, 454 in the part number, that means that the hinge is 4.5 tall and 4 wide. You can kind of tell that it doesn't look like it's square. It's a bit taller than it is wide. And indeed, it's 4.5 inch tall and 4 wide. This is very likely the proper hinge to use in most installations, especially all installations when you have a drywall frame that's going to wrap over the edge of the wall where you don't have a clearance issue. So what I'm driving at is the common hinge size in a 4.5 tall is just 4.5 wide, and that's a good one size fits all in almost all instances sort of width. But that doesn't mean that it's the best size or the proper size to use. And in fact, in most instances, it's not at all the right size, the best size to use. And it really depends on how much clearance that you need. Now, if you don't, need to think about it, okay, we'll order a 4.5 inch hinge in the width, but you could order a better hinge. So the distance, how far out that vertical axis of pivoting or the barrel of the hinge sits from the face of the door, or actually from the center of the door, is actually a pretty important item to calculate. And let's go ahead and move into calculating that now, or explaining why 4.5 inch wide may not be the best choice and why 4 inch might be a better choice, or maybe why it's the wrong choice altogether. So let's switch to the screen view to do that. Now, this is the item that we're looking at in the site, and we're talking about the determination of the width of the unit, of the hinge, and let's talk about that. So when you have a frame and a door and a frame and a wall, let's say, you have your door here, got your hinge, and someone with some pretty poor artistic skills, I apologize. The dimension that we're concerned with is how far is that vertical axis of pivoting, not only from the center of the door, where the center of the weight of the door is going to certainly reside, but how far is it away from the face of the frame is the hinge, and how far does it need to be? What I mean to say is, when that door gets out to, 90 degree, okay, not a big deal where that dimension is, although it is a big deal because you want that as close to the center line here as possible. But when it gets out to, 180 degree, oh, okay, now the space inside of here becomes important. So in our scenario where if we had standard, standard stud construction, and our frame is wrapping the wall, you can see that having the center line as close, tucked back to the face of the, or tucked back to the center line of the thickness of the door is as important as possible, which is why on this job we have a 4-inch wide hinge, because we literally have a frame wrapping the wall. It is not installed any other way, and there's no reason to have a 4.5-inch hinge, because mechanically it is a more efficient installation for the hinge to carry the weight of the door when that center line, that vertical axis of pivoting, is as close to the center line of the thickness of the door as possible. Now, where we get into the need to think about that further is when we have, let's say, a very thick wall, Now, where does the door need to be in relationship to the wall? If this is a 5 3/4 frame, and if this is a, 100-year-old 14-inch masonry wall, where you center the frame, if you're going to bolt it to the wall, where you center the frame on that wall, and the degree of opening that you wish to achieve, all will determine how wide of a hinge you go with. So if you know that you have a scenario where you're going to have some clearance problem, like the outside corner of the wall, or maybe applied trim, or imagine if this door was inset into the frame deeper, now you've got to think about where that center line is located. Well, there's a formula for doing that, and we can start with looking in the Bommer catalog, which is the link to the manufacturer's page here. That will pull up their page. And as we pull up the manufacturer's page, we can click on the product catalog, and from there we can just type in the words wide throw, and that will get us to this schematic. And this does not, there is a formula that is used for this. But they're saying to determine the correct hinge width, it's necessary to know the door thickness, hinge back set, which is the distance from the back of the hinge to the back of the door, this area, this unmachined area here if it's a wood door, or a a handed hollow metal door, and the clearance that is required, necessary distance from the jamb face to when the door is open, including any trim. Doors up to 2 1/4 will normally have a 1/4-inch back set. Okay, here's the formula. Here is the formula. So the formula is door thickness dt minus hinge back set times 2. Okay, so 1.75, let's just say it's 1 3/4 door, minus a 1/4-inch back set times 2 equals 3-inch, right? Okay, so now we've got 3-inch. So what we're going to add to that is our clearance and our inset. So at this point, you can decide, well, what is my clearance? In the prior example where the frame wraps the wall, your clearance is 0. Okay, it's literally 0. You have no clearance requirement. And then your inset is, it's probably about 3/32 of an inch. So let's just say you know, an eighth of an inch, and it's not that. It's, you know, it's 90 thousandths, but let's just say an eighth of an inch. This is going to equal 3 1/8. You use the next size available in a 4.5 inch tall hinge. The shortest, pardon me, the narrowest hinge is a 4 inch. So you can see in all instances where you wrap the wall, 4 inches is the proper size to use. And as you play with the clearance requirement, and that's really what drives the width of the hinge. Again, in our scenario, we have a huge block frame here, and then we wall, and then we have our little frame. You know, and let's say, you know, when we get the door out to 180 degree with our hinge pin here. You know, let's say that our clearance that's going to be required is from the face of the frame to our door, from here to here. You know, that could be 3 inch. Okay, so 3 plus 3 plus our inset of an eighth of an inch. Use the next largest size, which is, you know, you could probably make a 6 inch wide hinge work, not worrying too much about the inset. But now you start to get the math of the clearance is really what is driving that. Now you could have a deep inset, and what I mean by that is you could have a frame that could be 18 inch, and your door, okay, could literally be set you know, 6 inches in. So the inset could be a very important component to that formula. Now, inset doesn't play that type of a role often, but there are times when it does. So you have to be mindful of that inset, of what that's going to be. In aluminum storefront, the inset's generally 0 because the frame is flush. The door is flush to the face of the frame, although it can be 1/8 of an inch inset. Either one is possible. But that's why if you've ever worked on aluminum storefront, you're going to see very often a 4 inch wide hinge. I mean, 4.5 by 4 is the typical aluminum storefront size hinge to use. And that is because it's the proper hinge to use. Because generally their frames are going to be really close to the outside of the wall. You know, there's not going to be much of a clearance requirement whatsoever. So question why we're using 4.5 inch wide hinges. It might work, and it does work, and it's the absolute most common commercial width of hinge sold, but it can be better. And being aware of the formula, which again is door thickness minus backset multiplied by 2, plus your clearance, plus your inset requirement. And, you know, it's not a overly complicated scenario. So the rule of thumb, as far as I'm concerned, is if you have frames that are wrapping walls, use 4 inch wide hinges. If you have some unusual aspect in either wall thickness, and there's a disparity between wall thickness and jamb depth, or you have some sort of applied molding, or you have shutters, or you have brick molding, or you have a deep inset for some reason. In deep insets, I see normally in old, very, very old construction before steel was used in building construction on the first floor where those walls are massively thick. So be mindful that you probably, you know, you can go a long way and not have to behave, or I should say, you can go a long way and not have to observe the behavior of this relationship, but to do your job the best way possible, keeping this in the back of your mind is part of the job. Okay, we've adequately covered how the width comes into play. Now, the last part of the part number really, and be mindful, you can order these, a BB5000 and everything from 3.5, all the way up to probably 6 by 6 would be my guess. You know, 3.5, 4, 4.5, 5, 6. I'm guessing on 6. you know, 3.5, 4, 4.5, 5, 6, 7, 8. You can certainly order it up to 8-inch wide. Now, the 652 in the part number, that means a couple of things. It means it's made of steel, and that it has a satin chrome plating on it. Satin chrome plating over steel is the most durable of all artificial finishes. An artificial finish would be a plating. A natural finish would be where the base material is either just polished or brushed, and that would be an example of that would be if it was made of stainless steel base material, where you would either polish it or brush it to turn it into satin. That's the most durable of all natural finishes. But short of ordering stainless steel, if the most durable of finishes is what's important, short of ordering stainless, 652 would be the way to go. The number 652 is the BHMA code for US 26D, but that tells us, the BHMA code tells us the base material and the finish. The US 26D tells us satin chrome, but doesn't tell us what the material is made of. It could be made of, you know, plastic for all that matters, or zinc. You know, it's not steel or stainless or brass or bronze, things of that nature. Now, below this video in the extended description is some additional information as well. Sold as each, you know, ball bearing, 5-knuckle, full mortise, etc., etc. There is a link to a document called Cut Sheet. Before we get to that, let's go over what else is in this package. You're going to get all machine screws and all wood screws, generally all the time. It would be absolutely considered best practice for you to indicate at the time of order the screws that you would like. Not that with a 4.5 by 4 you're going to necessarily be short of screws, but you know, a 4.5 by 4, I'm thinking it's going to be used on probably a steel door and maybe a wood frame, a wood door. Pardon me, a steel frame and a wood door, most common. But you might be doing wood by wood. So what you don't want to run into is being short of screws. At the time of order, indicate in the comment field what you want. All wood screws, all machine screws, half and half, etc., etc. And they will endeavor to supply that. Also in the box are some shims. These shims are used, obviously, to help you position the door where you need it to be in the frame. If it's a fire-rated door, don't use cardboard shims. Don't use anything other than steel shims. And we can certainly supply you with steel shims for those applications where you have to shim a fire-rated door. It is an NFPA 80 that shims, if any are used, must be made of steel. And if your local building code has referred to NFPA 80, it's code to use steel shims. Now, there is a link to the cut sheet below here, so let's switch back to the screen view and take a look at that. Okay, so this is the item that we're looking at. Here's that cut sheet that I discussed. And this is really going to give you the important dimensional properties as it pertains to this hinge. Regarding the hinge screw locations, this is what's called the template pattern. This exact pattern is a industry standard for a 4.5-inch hinge that observes the template location for those screw holes. So be mindful, regardless of any manufacturer that you're looking at, if it's a template pattern hinge, it will have these identical dimensions. These columns here talk about these are all the different part numbers for the hinges that you can do, different columns for base materials. We're obviously looking at a BB5000, tells us it's a steel hinge, and then we're looking at these two values here for the A dimension, which is the leaf to the swag line, and that's what you will have there. Okay, these other hinges are wide throw hinges, and as a result is no longer a 0 in this field because it is a non-standard hinge. It's a wide throw, and their code at Bommer is a 1 for wide throw, which is why you see those A dimensions in another row in the table. Okay, so handy document. The LB hinges, those are 3-knuckle hinges. Very it's a cleaner look on a hinge. You know, a 5-knuckle hinge, you know, that's the standard. That's what people default to. Doesn't mean it's the best hinge for your application. You may like the look of a 3-knuckle hinge. You may like the price savings of a 5-knuckle hinge. So you might want to look at both LB and BB. When you drop the LB or the BB, it just becomes a plain bearing hinge. Now, where you can find all that material is back on the page here, manufacturer's page as seen here, where we can pull up the full product catalog and take a look at that. So let me click on that manufacturer's page. The product catalog is here, and just a couple of highlights of the product catalog. You scroll down, let's see here, about 24 pages in, and you'll get to the how to order page from Bommer. And this is how we would go about dissecting the part number, which I think is, really a great way to get familiar with the Bommer nomenclature. Okay, every manufacturer has their own way of naming stuff, and in order to properly specify the hinge that you need or expect to get, or if you'd like to see the options that the manufacturer has available, this sort of how to order page is indispensable. Then as you scroll through, we can search for the BB5000 series hinges, and we can get to the page where that's going to be available to us as a cut sheet. And here it is. They do talk about the sizes. I wasn't correct in the maximum size. 5x5 is as large as they go. The 3-knuckle version is the LB series. A little bit cleaner look, some people would certainly argue, and I wouldn't say that it's not a cleaner look. Okay. So very handy. The name Bommer is really synonymous with single-acting spring hinges, meaning if you know the name Bommer at all, you probably do for their 3029 series of double-acting spring hinges, and that's indeed what it is. When it comes to spring hinges, Bommer has the absolute greatest diversity of product line when it comes to single and double-acting spring hinges to assist a door, or to get a door to close, basically. And indeed, it was the Bommer brothers who invented the product in about 1877 or so. That's how far back the company goes. And in fact, fun fact, it is the husband of the granddaughter of the original, one of the two brothers who founded Bommer Industries. So the catalog is fun to go through. You'll see all things spring related from Bommer. And if you deal in commercial hardware at all, you probably want to familiarize yourself with the very peculiar, neat footprint of material that Bommer makes. On that link to the manufacturer's page, you can pull up not only all of the Bommer products that we sell, but a link to the manufacturer's website, as well as a link to that full product catalog. And let's switch back to the camera view, talk about some final options, and then finish up this video. Now, briefly, some common options that you'll see on a hinge like this would be certainly non-removable pins, where they drill a set screw down into the base of the hinge, into one of the knuckles, and they drill and tap that hole, and that set screw sits inside of that hole, and in the hinge pin itself, there's a groove cut in that hinge pin so that when that set screw tightens into it, you can't drive the hinge pin out. So that's a real common option. Ball bearing and security pin, when you have exterior doors that swing out, those are always going to be standard specifications for those hinges. Other options in no particular order, radiused corners, 1/4 inch or 5/8 radius can be accommodated. If you're doing aluminum storefront, you're going to want a really tiny radius. I think it's about 5/32 of an inch. I don't see in the Bommer catalog where they can accommodate that radius. So if you are doing aluminum storefront, 4.5 by 4 would be a good size. You might need a small radius on there, on that corner of that hinge, so reach out to us. Other security options, you can do security stud and maximum security stud would be a couple of other options that can be done. Decorative tips, that's a button tip is what they call that. Ball tip would be the most common of decorative tips. Urn tip, steeple tip, acorn tip are all very common. You can drive that pin out should you need to, should you want to. When I hang doors into frames, I separate the leaves, get them attached to the door and frame, and then I bring the door to the frame and tap the pins down. That may not be how you do it, that's just how I do it. So that pin can be driven out. Obviously, every variant of base material and finish can be done. In terms of finishes, this can be done in every finish, that can be put onto steel, basically. Bomber is incredibly proud of their plating capability. They have a separate plating plant, and they can do 33 or so different plated finishes, or 33 different finishes. Not all of them, of course, would be plated. But, your brasses, your bronze, your chromes, your nickels, satin, polished, antique, oil rubbed bronze, prime coat, zinc, bright black japanned. They can certainly accommodate your requirement, with satin chrome being the most common. Last thing I'd like to point out to you is the Bomber logo, and right above it, it says Made in USA. That's a fact that Bomber is quite proud of, as am I to represent them. Not only do they say Made in USA, but their components, everything is sourced domestically. The steel that the hinge is made out of. Not only is the hinge assembled and manufactured in North Carolina, but the steel is sourced domestically. Everything that they do is. And they're quite proud of it. And they're the only manufacturer who can make that statement. Any questions when it comes to hinges? Any questions on the BB5000 in a 454 and a 652 finish, or any other Bomber product, please feel free to reach out to us. And thank you.